which warmth could seep. Back in her small studio apartment, Lila sat by the window, the soft glow of the town's lights spilling in to mingle with the shadows. She held a brush hesitantly, staring at the blank canvas before her. The memories of Grace, her late husband, whispered in the stillness, threatening to overwhelm her fragile resolve. But Ethan's quiet support echoed in her mind, the shared moments of kindness and poetry lending her strength. With a deep breath, she dipped the brush into vibrant blues and warm golds, the colors flowing onto the canvas with tentative strokes. Her glow flickered uncertainly but grew steadier, a small flame rekindled within her. The act of creation was both painful and exhilarating, an embrace of grief and hope entwined. One evening, drawn by a restless impulse, Lila and Ethan wandered through the softly glowing town square. The emotional lights of their neighbors shimmered like stars come down to earth, a constellation of human feeling that wrapped around them in a tender embrace. Their footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones as their glows mingled, faint and flickering, yet undeniably real. They walked side by side in comfortable silence, the night air filled with the scent of earth and jasmine, the distant laughter of children, and the gentle rustle of leaves. In that shared moment, unspoken but deeply felt, Lila sensed the first true stirrings of connection, a fragile thread weaving their hearts closer amid the lingering shadows. Though the path ahead remained uncertain, the flickers of light between them illuminated a way forward. Small acts of kindness, quiet moments of vulnerability, and the courage to face their pain together began to chip away at the walls they had both built. The town's unique gift, the visible glow of emotion, became a beacon, guiding Lila and Ethan toward healing and perhaps, one day, love. As she lay awake that night, Lila's thoughts drifted to the poetry Ethan had shared, to the soft pulse of her own light growing stronger. The darkness that had once seemed so absolute was beginning to break apart, revealing glimpses of dawn. And in the quiet, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the faintest flickers could grow into a brilliant flame. The light was fragile, yes, but it was there, and it was enough for now. Outside, the town's glow shimmered under the vast night sky, a silent promise of second chances and the healing power of connection. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Lila felt ready to take the next step, guided by the gentle pulse of hope kindled by a quiet bookstore owner's kindness. And as the night deepened, so did the light within her, flickering softly but steadily, a beacon in the darkness, waiting to be embraced. The warm glow of the cafe wrapped around me like a familiar embrace, a stark contrast to the cold weight that still sat heavily in my chest. Maggie's Cafe had always been a sanctuary, a place where the light of the town seemed to gather and pulse with its own quiet rhythm. Tonight that light felt softer, more intimate, a perfect setting for the conversation that awaited us. I sat across from Maggie at our usual corner table, the one with the chipped wooden edges and the faint scent of roasted coffee beans lingering in the air. Her curly red hair caught the amber light, flames flickering in every strand. Her smile, though still bright, held a hint of fragility I hadn't seen before. "It's been tough," she began, her voice low but steady. "Losing someone you thought was going to be part of your story for a long time. I never thought I'd have to face that kind of quiet, you know, the kind that sneaks in and dims your light without warning." Her words resonated deeply. I knew the feeling too well. The way grief could settle like a shadow, dulling the glow that once radiated so naturally. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, grateful that Maggie had broken the silence first. "I've been trying to find my light again," she continued, "but it's like learning to see in the dark. Every day is a small step forward, and sometimes 2 steps back. She reached behind the counter and pulled out a small card, its edges worn, but the watercolor painting on it still vibrant. It was a tiny landscape, a sunrise breaking over a field of wildflowers, a symbol of hope, she said. I traced the delicate brushstrokes with my eyes, feeling a spark of inspiration flicker inside me. I painted this after the breakup, Maggie confessed. It was my way of telling myself that even after the darkest nights, the light returns. I want to believe that for both of us. Her openness stirred something inside me, a tentative hope that maybe I wasn't as alone in my struggle as I'd thought. For the first time in months, my glow pulsed gently, a subtle but significant sign that the walls I'd built around my heart were beginning to crack. We talked late into the evening, sharing stories of loss and the slow, uneven path toward healing. Outside, the town's emotional glow shimmered like a sea of fireflies, each light a testament to the resilience of human connection. At one point, I found myself sketching on a napkin, the pencil moving almost of its own accord, capturing the warmth of the moment and the fragile thread of hope weaving between us. The scratch of graphite on paper was a soothing rhythm, a reminder that creation was possible even amidst pain. "You're going to find your way back," Maggie said softly, catching my gaze. "You just have to let yourself feel it, all of it. The sorrow, the joy, the fear. It's all part of the light." Her words settled over me like a gentle tide, washing away some of the heaviness that had clouded my vision. I realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Maggie by my side and the town's glowing hearts around me, I was ready to take the next step. As the night deepened, our glows intertwined to flickering lights, finding strength in shared vulnerability. And for the first time since I'd returned, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my light could shine again. The cafe door chimed softly as a late customer left, and I glanced around the cozy space, feeling the pulse of life and hope in every corner. Tomorrow was uncertain, but tonight, surrounded by friendship and the promise of new beginnings, I was ready to face whatever came next. And as I packed up my sketches and prepared to leave, I knew this was only the beginning. The path ahead might be shadowed by grief, but with every step, my heart's light would grow stronger, flickering, yes, but never extinguished. The night outside was cool and still, but inside me, something had shifted. The light was returning, and I was ready to follow it. The last light of day hung low over the quaint town, casting a soft, golden hue across the familiar streets I had once called home. It was as if the town itself was breathing in the quiet, holding its breath in that delicate moment between day and night. My chest tightened with a blend of anticipation and dread as I approached the edge of the lake. The place Grace and I had spent so many sunlit afternoons, dreaming aloud about our future. The cabin stood there, weathered but steady, its wooden frame wrapped in the embrace of climbing ivy and wildflowers that danced in the gentle breeze. My fingers brushed over the worn railing of the small porch, and the scent of pine and earth rose up to meet me, pulling me back to a time when everything felt simple and whole. I hadn't expected Ethan to come with me, but when he quietly appeared beside me, his presence was a balm to my raw edges. His dark eyes held a softness I hadn't noticed before, and though his glow was faint, it pulsed gently like a candle flickering in a draught. I felt a warmth spreading through me, fragile and new. "I didn't realize this place meant so much to you," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying the muted undercurrent of someone treading carefully. "It's beautiful." I swallowed, the knot in my throat tightening. It was home for us. For me, it still is, even if it's different now. He nodded, glancing around as if absorbing the memories etched into every corner. "I'm glad you shared it with me. We lingered a moment longer, letting the silence speak, then turned back toward the town. The streets were beginning to glow with the evening's emotional light, each person's heart casting a gentle radiance that painted the night in hues of hope, joy, and longing. Yet, as always, Ethan's light was softer, more reserved, a quiet ember waiting to ignite. Back in his bookstore, he handed me a slender volume of poetry, its pages worn and familiar. "I thought you might like this," he said, a tentative smile breaking across his lips. I cradled the book against my chest, feeling the weight of the gesture. "Thank you." His gaze held mine a beat longer, and I sensed the layers of his guardedness beginning to peel away. We talked then, not just about poems or the town's curious phenomenon, but about the fears and losses that shaped us. With each shared word, the space between us softened. Later, we wandered under the soft glow of street lamps, our emotional lights mingling subtly. At the park, I stopped by the bench where Grace and I had carved our initials years ago. Tracing the faded letters, I felt the ache of absence, but also the gentle pulse of remembrance that didn't hurt as much as it used to. Ethan stood beside me without words, his quiet support steadying the fragile threads of hope weaving through my heart. That night, as I lay in bed, the town outside shimmering with countless lights, I realized something was shifting inside me. The past was still there, etched deeply, but maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings too. And with Ethan beside me, the night didn't feel so lonely anymore. The glow outside my window softened into the early dawn as I drifted to sleep, dreams mingling memories with the faint spark of something bright on the horizon, a light I was learning to trust once more. The studio was quiet, except for the soft scrape of brush on canvas, a sound Leela hadn't heard from herself in months. She stood before the large blank canvas, the surface glowing faintly in the golden light of the late afternoon sun filtering through the window. Outside, the town was beginning to gather its nightly glow, emotions of the residents bursting into radiant colors that lit the streets like fireflies in a jar. But inside, Leela felt only a dull acre shadow, dimming her heart's light and extinguishing the vivid hues she once summoned with ease. She dipped her brush into a pool of deep blue paint, hesitating before touching the canvas. The strokes she laid down were uncertain, fragmented, as if her hand were remembering something it had long forgotten. The image in her mind was clearer, vibrant scene of the town illuminated by the emotional lights that everyone wore like a second skin after dark, but the colors on the canvas failed to match the brilliance she saw in her mind's eye. Instead, they blurred and faded, mixing into muted grays and washed-out blues. A sigh escaped her lips, heavy with frustration. "Why can't I make it come alive?" she whispered to the empty room. The door creaked open softly, and Ethan stepped inside, carrying a small stack of well-worn poetry books in his hands. His dark eyes, usually so reserved, held a flicker of gentle concern as he noticed the unfinished painting and the tension in her shoulders. "I thought you might need some company," he said quietly, setting the books down on a nearby table, "and perhaps some inspiration." Leela looked up, surprised but grateful. "I'm trying," she admitted, "but it feels like the light inside me is just flickering barely there." Ethan nodded knowingly and settled into a chair by the window. He opened one of the poetry books and began to read aloud. His voice was low, steady, carrying the cadence of verses that spoke of loss and hope intertwined. The words filled the room, wrapping around Lila like a warm blanket against the chill of her grief. As she listened, Lila felt something shift inside her. The dull ache softened, replaced by a fragile thread of warmth. Her hand found the brush again, this time moving with tentative confidence. The strokes became bolder, the colors richer, as if Ethan's words had breathed life back into her fading glow. Outside, the town's emotional lights flared brighter, a symphony of colors reflecting the collective heartbeats of the people. Lila glanced through the window, watching as the radiant auras mingled and danced, a living tapestry of human feeling. It was beautiful land, achingly distant from the shadow she'd carried for so long. Ethan's voice continued, weaving poetry and quiet encouragement. When he finally closed the book, Leela felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the delicate hope blossoming within her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with newfound resolve, "for reminding me there's still light to find." Ethan smiled softly, his own dim glow flickering faintly brighter in response. As he left, Lila stood by the window, brush in hand, watching the glowing town below. Her heart pulsed with a tentative spark, fragile but real promise that even in the darkest nights, the smallest light could grow. She turned back to the canvas and began to paint anew, each stroke a step toward healing, toward rediscovering the vibrant colors of life and love waiting just beyond the shadows. And with that first spark, the night felt a little less lonely. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of early autumn as I stepped into the heart of the town square. The familiar cobblestones beneath my feet seemed to hum with an energy I hadn't felt in years. Around me, the townspeople bustled with purpose, stringing lanterns that shimmered with soft hues of gold and lavender, ribbons fluttering like gentle brushstrokes of light in the breeze. This was the week of the Emotional Light Festival, a celebration I had admired from afar in my youth, but now, standing here, it felt more urgent, more personal. Jonas Reed approached, his silver-streaked hair catching the sun's rays. He wore his usual neat button-down and held a clipboard filled with notes. "Lila, Ethan," he greeted us both, his voice warm. "Glad you could join. We have much to do." Ethan shifted beside me, his dim glow a steady pulse against the vibrant backdrop. "I wasn't sure about getting involved," he admitted quietly, but Jonas convinced me. I smiled, feeling the familiar tug of connection. "Me too. Maybe it's time." Jonas led us to his study, a cozy room filled with relics and photographs chronicling the town's rich history. The walls whispered stories of generations past, of celebrations where emotions were not just felt but seen, shared openly in glowing bursts of color. "The festival isn't just tradition," Jonas explained. "It's a reminder of our resilience, our collective heart." Listening, I felt the weight of my grief press lighter for a moment, the flicker of my glow dancing with the memories of brighter days. Later, at Maggie's cafe, the aroma of coffee and cinnamon wrapped around us like a comforting shawl. Maggie beamed as she placed steaming mugs before us. "You both look ready to take on the festival," she teased, her red curls bouncing with her smile. Ethan chuckled softly. "We're learning." Conversations flowed easily, the rhythm of shared tasks weaving a tapestry of trust and tentative hope between us. My glow pulsed gently, a soft light against the warmth of the cafe's walls. As twilight descended, I stepped outside, the town's emotional lights bursting into brilliance, lanterns, ribbons, and the collective auras of friends and strangers alike. For the first time in months, my heart's light flickered not with sorrow, but with a fragile spark of hope. The festival was coming, and with it, perhaps, a new beginning. But beneath the surface, I knew the coming days would test the fragile threads of vulnerability Ethan and I were beginning to weave. Would our lights burn steady, or would the shadows of grief and fear snuff them out before dawn? Either way, I was ready to find out. The night air was alive with possibility, And as I stood surrounded by the glow of my hometown, I whispered a promise to myself, to embrace whatever light I could muster and to let it lead me home. At that moment, the festival was no longer just a town event, it was a beacon for my own journey back to life, back to love, back to light. And the first step was right here, amidst the flickering lanterns and the hopeful hum of a community coming alive. The night had settled over the quaint town like a soft blanket, the usual hum of warmth and light weaving through the streets. Lanterns hung from wrought iron posts, their gentle flicker casting dancing shadows on the cobblestones. Leela found herself drawn to the quiet comfort of the little bench outside Ethan's bookstore, where the glow of the town's unique emotional light pooled in gentle waves around them. They sat side by side, a comfortable distance that suggested familiarity but still respected the fragile walls each had built around their hearts. Leela's chestnut hair caught the moonlight, strands falling loosely over her paint-stained shirt. Ethan's dark hair looked almost black in the night, his thoughtful eyes reflecting the soft luminescence that enveloped them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not awkward but filled with the kind of unspoken understanding that years of shared space, though not always shared words, could create. Leela's gaze drifted to the faint glow that danced around Ethan, a light that was usually so muted it seemed nearly invisible. Tonight, however, she noticed a subtle flicker, like the tentative first spark of a flame struggling against the dark. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "I brought something," he said, his voice low and steady but carrying a hint of nervousness she hadn't heard before. Curious, Leela turned to look at him. In his hands was a slender book, its cover worn but cared for, the edges softened from frequent handling. "Poetry," he explained simply. Leela smiled, the warmth in her chest growing despite the chill in the air. "I'd love to hear you read," she said quietly. Ethan nodded and opened the book with reverence, fingers trembling just slightly as he found the poem he wanted to share. The opening lines were soft, almost a whisper against the backdrop of the night. In quiet moments, light dances from within, shadows fall but never win. Hearts that flicker, faint but true, find their glow in me and you. His voice was steady yet intimate, every word imbued with a depth of feeling that surprised Leela. She watched as his dim glow, so often hidden behind a veil of reserve, pulsed gently with the rhythm of his reading. The emotion in the poem spilled over, a delicate bridge forming between their separate worlds of grief and guarded hope. When he finished, the silence that followed was thick but not uncomfortable. Leela's heart beat with a new rhythm, a hopeful pulse that matched the subtle light now blooming around Ethan. Tentatively, she reached out and laid her hand over his, the warmth of their touch sparking a quiet fire that neither wanted to extinguish. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "for sharing that with me." Ethan's eyes met hers, the flicker in his glow steadier now, more assured. "I think I've been afraid," he admitted, "that if I let my light shine too brightly, it might burn something precious away. But tonight, with you, it feels safer to try." Leela squeezed his hand gently, the heaviness that had weighed on her heart loosening just a bit. "Sometimes," she murmured, "it's the faintest lights that end up guiding us home." As the night deepened, they stayed there together, their shared vulnerabilities weaving a tapestry of trust and tentative hope. Outside, the town continued to glow, a testament to the power of emotional light, the very thing that brought two broken souls closer, flickering steadily toward healing. And in that quiet moment, under the vast canopy of stars and soft lantern light, Leela felt something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time. The beginning of something new, fragile but fiercely alive, But just as the warmth began to settle between them, a sudden chill brushed through the air, a subtle reminder that their inner shadows were never far behind. Would they find the courage to hold on to their fledgling light, or would the ghosts of the past dim their glow once more? The night was far from over, and the threads of trust they had begun to weave were delicate, ready to be tested. I sat by the window of Maggie's cafe, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking cups around me a distant murmur. Outside, the town was alive with its nightly ritual, a kaleidoscope of emotional light spilling from every home and heart. The street lamps cast golden pools on the cobblestones, but the true illumination came from the people themselves. Their auras shimmered in vivid colors, pulses of warmth and joy, sorrow and love. Yet my own light was barely a whisper against the dark backdrop of the night, a fragile flicker struggling to hold steady. The weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on my chest. Memories of Grace's laughter that once filled every corner of my life. The brushstrokes of our shared days urged unbidden, drowning out the tentative hope I'd been nurturing. Each recollection felt like a shadow, stretching long and cold, threatening to swallow me whole. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with a trembling finger, willing myself to breathe, to stay anchored in the present. Maggie's voice drew me back. "Hey, Lila, you okay? You've been quiet tonight." I glanced up to find her warm eyes searching mine, the curl of her red hair catching the soft light. Her glow was steady and bright, a beacon in the swirling sea of emotions. I wanted to smile, to tell her that I was fine, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded faintly. "You don't have to pretend here," she said gently, sliding into the seat across from me. "We all have our shadows. It's okay to let them in sometimes." Her kindness was a balm, but it also reminded me of how deeply I'd retreated into myself. I was afraid that if I let go, the darkness would consume me. I feared losing the fragile thread that kept me tethered to hope. Across town, Ethan sat in the quiet sanctuary of his bookstore, the scent of aged paper and ink a familiar comfort. His dim glow cast faint, wavering shadows along the shelves, mirroring the turmoil within. He turned the thin pages of a weathered poetry book, the verses resonating with the ache he rarely voiced aloud. He longed to reach out to me, to bridge the distance I'd put between us. But the scars left by his own losses made him cautious, reluctant to expose the fragile light he guarded so fiercely. Each attempt to offer support was tempered by the fear of rejection, not just of his feelings, but of the vulnerability they revealed. Back in my studio, I stood before a canvas half covered in muted blues and greys, the colors dull and lifeless, mirroring my spirit. My hands shook as I lifted a brush, memories of Grace swirling in my mind like a storm. The ache of loss was raw, a wound that refused to heal. Every stroke felt like a battle against the darkness that threatened to smother my creativity, my very soul. I sank onto the floor amidst scattered sketches, the silence pressing in. The emotional glow that surrounded the town's nights felt like a distant dream, something I had once been part of but could no longer reach. The fear that my light might extinguish completely gnawed at me, a shadow darker than the night itself. One evening, Maggie found me there, curled up on the floor with paint-stained hands and tear-streaked cheeks. She didn't speak at first, simply sat beside me, her presence a steadying force. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was soft but firm. "You don't have to carry this alone, Leela. Let us in. Let me in." Her words were an invitation, a fragile bridge over the chasm of my grief. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something warmer than sorrow, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to the light. But even as I took that first step, The shadows of the past lingered, whispering doubts and fears. Could I trust myself to be vulnerable again?